The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Good morning and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm Deborah Monk, empowering you to find your creative voice. And today, Shelley and Mandra both had other obligations, so I reached out to Kelly and Regis. Because they had complicated schedulings and contract requirements, I thought, you know what, I'm going to aim higher and I'm going to go over their head. And instead of Kelly and Regis, I'm going to get Kelly and Rick. So today, Kelly Mcintire and Rick Peoples are going to be my co-hosts as we continue with last week's episode. Going from great beginnings to this week, we will discuss the dreaded sagging middle of your book. So, Kelly, you are going to bring us the things that the characteristics of a bad middle. Would you like to start with that?
Sure. So we've all read books where the beginning is wonderful and then you kind of get halfway through and you just lose interest in the book. And some of the worst things you can do is provide irrelevant details.
Totally agree.
That's everything I write.
I think that's why she crosses out so much.
Exactly.
We should maybe mention that Kelly and Rick are a part of my other writing group that we've done. Kelly Mcintire has published 2 books called Fairy Meadow and Time Twisted. Yep. And Rick Peoples has published Hey Ma, Your Husband's Dead. So I'm sitting here between 2 published writers, and I think that all 3 of us would say that once our group started, we all published.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're testament to
the Wonder Triplets.
We'll need a new song. So that we're just a testament to how important and helpful a good writing group can be.
Absolutely. I never, ever would have actually got the manuscript done, let alone publish, if I didn't have the support of a writing group.
And then not only did she publish, and now she publishes twice. And so can we also mention that...
Yes, they both have 2 books. I have 1.
That wasn't...
Yes, they've both sold a lot of books. I've sold none. Anything else you want to point out?
I think we should...
You have hair. I don't have hair.
Well,
it's ironic.
Jonathan?
I'm with you on that one, buddy.
There you go, brother.
But we should mention that ever since she's published her second book, she now comes to writing group last. She's always last. It's like she has to make this grand entrance.
I make my entrance. I'm fashionably late. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, all right. Back to, so Kelly, I just wanted to remind our listeners how qualified you both are in telling us how to avoid these sagging middles and how how we all help each other.
Well, the one thing that was hugely helpful to me is especially in my first book, I had a lot of irrelevant details that all of you pointed out to me.
Very kindly, I hope.
Very kindly, very kindly. And it's not fun to hear that your writing is irrelevant. That's not something any author wants to hear. But one of the big mistakes that I made was an elongated family tree. And it was talking about the main character's aunts and her uncle and her grandparents. And really the only thing that I needed was the one vital character of her grandmother.
Right.
So once we sort of got rid of that, it's, you have to go in and surgically cut what isn't necessary to the plot, because what you're trying to really do is just keep your story moving.
And those other characters could become characters in the follow-up book. They're not necessarily gone, so it's not like you're going to just delete the writing.
Exactly.
You could save that in another Word document, the descriptions, their character flaws. That could become the next book. So it's not as painful as it sounds.
Exactly. That's true. That's a really good point. Especially, I write kids' books, and for kids' books, there are lots of series that become very popular. So sometimes you do need that in your back pocket.
Well, and I think as the writer, sometimes you need to know. You need to know do they come from a big family or a little family. So you need to know a lot of the things that you're writing are things for yourself.
That's true.
And it helps you get to know your story. It's just that then you need a good editing people who help you, or that you're able to pull out the details that you don't need.
But I think it always comes down to who's your core audience. So one of the things I learned very early on is I'm all about extra details and junk that you probably don't need in a book. And when
Rick loves details.
And when we were talking about your book, I'm like, well, what about this? And couldn't this one have this and that one do that? And you just said, no, I'm writing for this particular audience.
That's true.
Educationally, psychologically, this is the most they can handle. So you really set your barrier up, and I mean playground up, sandbox. This is what I can do.
Exactly.
Great point. Know your audience.
That's a really good point,
Right.
because I think when you're writing for adults, you do have to provide those details, because it just makes it a little bit more complex and more interesting for an adult reader.
All right. Irrelevant details.
There we go.
Yeah.
The second thing is too much description.
Yes.
So I was writing an article once years ago, and it was a school assignment, and it was about a volleyball game, and it was beach volleyball, and I was writing about the sand and the water and the sun,
The seagulls.
Nobody cared. Everybody wanted to know what happened in the volleyball game. So you want to make sure that you don't provide too much description if it's not relevant to the topic of what you're trying to your main point, what you're trying to get across.
And how you put them in there. If you wanted to talk about the sand, put the sand in as the server fell and her knee started bleeding because the sand was so rough.
Exactly.
Now you're able to put the sand in, but I think beginning writers think, well, let me set the stage. Right. You know, the volleyball game was about to start, but first I have to tell you about the sand and the water and the wind and the seagulls. Unless the seagull comes and, takes the ponytail holder out of the server and then she misses because of that. We probably don't need to know about the seagull.
Exactly. You need to keep it. Again,
keep it moving.
Keep it moving. That's really what it comes down to. The other big thing is telling and not showing,
which we've talked about many times on this show. It's a mistake we make everywhere.
It's so easy when you're writing. You just get caught up in the rhythm of writing, and you'll say, "Oh, my character was so happy." So Debbie is so happy that Kelly and Rick are on the podcast today.
Very true.
But it would be much better to say, Debbie's smile lit up the room when Kelly and Rick walked in.
Oh.
It was the opposite because Deb was late, but who's counting?
Deb came running in thinking, damn it, again? Why am I always the last one?
And then finally, I think the misuse of dialogue, either having too much dialogue or too little dialogue. And again, it gets back into, you get caught up in too many details sometimes, and other times you don't provide enough. So you have to strike that balance. Dialogue can be the best tool for moving your story along, but you have to make sure that you're using it appropriately. And again, you have to know your audience.
Right. You can't just have two talking heads.
Exactly.
Huh. Boy, well, it sounds, as long as you don't do all those things, it seems like it would be easy to have a middle that was really good. But just in case what not to do isn't enough, Rick is now going to tell us what we should do.
Well, first of all, I do find it a little ironic that you invited me here to talk about the saggy middle. So thank you very much for that.
And why do you find that ironic?
Just the saggy middle of my own. I think for me, it's all about trying to figure out what makes you lose momentum in the middle of the book first. Because for me, I always kind of start at what's the root cause and where I'm going. As writers, we always talk about how you want to hook the audience in from the very beginning. I think last podcast you guys were talking about, you were in Barnes & Noble, you pulled up 3 books.
Yes.
You did the Neil Gaiman, that crazy woman in the insane asylum, and I forget that third one.
Glennon Doyle Melton was the Carry On Warrior.
Yeah, that was one. But it was just trying to figure out why, as writers, we're told get the hook going. And then you get the ending because you want the perfect ending. It's the middle where you just kind of lose a little bit of momentum, and that's kind of like you lose a little bit of steam, you lose a little bit of focus, and
it's like the 7-year itch.
Kind of, but
there's the honeymoon phase, and then there's we've been together 25 years. It's time to lazy.
I'm sitting right here.
But I think you look at that type of stuff and you kind of figure out what causes that sagging thing to happen. And a lot of it is you just get a little bit lost, you get a little bit confused. I mean, we can get that whole planter versus plotter type of thing where you're figuring out, okay, the planter, right? The plotters, pantsers. Thank you very much. Pantster versus the plotter.
I'm thinking, wait, we haven't talked about a planter. I don't even know what a planter is.
I think I'll have some more coffee, special coffee. But I think, you get the people that really plot everything out and you know exactly where things are going. But most writers that I know are more of fly by the seat of your pants, let the characters develop. But the challenge is when you're doing stuff like that, you kind of get lost and you lose a little bit of steam. So I always try to make sure that, hey, if I'm doing it, what I'll do is I'll shut off everything and just throw everything on paper. I think it was Ernest Hemingway was having this conversation with F. Scott Fitzgerald, and they're talking about writing and writer's block. And Ernest Hemingway basically said, listen, for 99 pages of a masterpiece, 98 of them are crap and one's really good. And the way to do that is you just throw everything out on paper, and you have to trust that you have the skill set and a good editor to come back and help you fix whatever the problem is. But if you spend all your time going back and doing revision after revision and moving a comma when you don't need to move a comma, it's kind of like the literary equivalent of, kids moving peas around the plate to make it look like you've eaten. It's the same thing with writing. So you've just got to find a way to move it forward. So what I try to do is I stop with all the crap, and I just throw everything out on paper and hope it works out the way I want it to work out, and I'll go back and fix it later. But there are a couple of other things I like to try to do as well. So I would take a look at finding a character that I kind of really like, and then I'll kill them off. And
oh boy, cue Kelly's and Debbie's confused face.
Well, I mean, you look at it. You look at books. So even go back to like Gone with the Wind, right? So you've got Red and Scarlet, and they had that little girl. Was it Bonnie? Was the little daughter they had? And she's, on her pony, she's zipping back and through, trying to show mommy and daddy how good of a horsewoman she is. And she takes that jump, falls off, breaks her neck, dies.
Oh, I didn't. That's
Did you not remember that?
I don't remember that.
Is he making up that?
No, it's the book, not the movie. But anyhow, Rhett ends up becoming a drunk louse, and he takes off, and he leaves Tara. That's the whole point of him leaving Scarlet and Tara. Oh, and that's the whole premise of the book, is that she becomes this strong woman because she's left by herself. Oh. So if you're looking for something, Game of Thrones, right? You've watched Game of Thrones? You've read Game of Thrones, Jonathan?
No.
Oh, God.
Sorry, I'm a loser.
All right. Well, anyhow, in Game of Thrones, we have this huge warrior, Khal Drogo. He's like the ultimate god of gods.
Is that Aquaman?
Warriors. It's Aquaman.
Okay.
And you think he's going to die in a bloody battle.
I know who that is, by the way.
Okay, good. But he gets a boo-boo, he gets infected, and he dies in an infection, and he's dead. But it takes his wife, who's always been this submissive person, and it's the catalyst for her becoming one of the strongest characters in the whole series.
Wow.
So it's all about, killing someone off gives your character an opportunity for growth emotionally and physically.
Huh.
Should I add that to the show notes, that it's important to kill off someone that
character?
you really like?
Literally. From a literal perspective?
I'm thinking, I thought the direction you were going with is that you kind of vomit your stuff out on the page, and then you take your work to your writing group.
Yep.
You kind of sharpen your knife there.
I do.
And then you take it home and you trim the fat.
And I do that as well.
Then you bring it back and you sharpen the knife.
But I sharpen the knife. But again, that's just to get stuff out. But if I'm looking for a way to create, to get my creative juices going, I'll try to kill off a character, or I'll do something so that the main character has some
more
growth,
motivated.
Has some motivation to move forward.
I'm going to add it to the show notes just in case.
Thank you very much.
This could be interesting for someone.
Just not the people in this room or anyone listening at this point in the morning.
A serial killer.
I think if you look at, I also try to, I love creating minor characters. I'm just full of just bizarre little characters that kind of pop up that hopefully will add something to the story. Someone that's going to move the plot along, or maybe give you some backstory on a character you don't know anything else. So, like if you look at Tiny Tim as an example,
yes.
He's someone that very minor character. He never talks to Scrooge, but you learn Scrooge sees him, understands that perhaps there is good in the world, and he's the one that kind of is the catalyst when to turn Scrooge around.
That's an excellent point. That's really true. I never thought about it really from that standpoint, but it's true. You can have a minor character who plays a major role in the plot.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I think the other thing is if you have a character that comes from another place, you can bring in different cultural things from another location or something along those lines.
And then your main characters are kind of dealing with the reaction to whatever that situation is or what those characters are.
Exactly.
And then I always like to throw a good betrayal in.
Right.
Very
That's
soap
true.
opera-ish, but if you've got a good betrayal in there, then usually what happens, it's a catalyst for the character to go off on their own and be isolated and go through all sorts of, cathartic experiences to move along. So, if you look at, I'm trying to think of a couple examples, but if you're going back to Game of Thrones, which is didn't work so well last time. But how about Sons of Anarchy? Did you watch Sons of Anarchy?
Negative. All right, here's the thing about me. If it's a very, very manly show on TV,
got it.
I'm out.
All right. So there's a cooking show. No,
Gordon Ramsay.
I've seen
How
them
do
all.
you know?
you got them. Okay. So but it's like you take a look at a Betrayal and you look at something that you didn't see coming. So
Right.
if you're looking at like Sons of Anarchy, there was a story where the lead character's mother killed her son's wife. And that kind of set him up for a whole nother story.
Wow, your main character's mother killed his wife. Wow.
So it kind of set things up. And for me, it's just it's adding another plot twist to take it. And it's something that's a little bit different. I don't think you have to do as extreme as these three things, but it's something to play around with.
You seem to have a bit of a dark side with your writing.
Well,
in the morning.
Yes, I do. But a lot of it is just, you've got to find ways to keep it interesting for yourself as the writer. And the key thing here is making sure that your readers are following along with it and it's organic and it makes sense. But it's finding different ways to add a plot twist that will keep the story moving forward.
And again, it's a great way of showing and not telling, because you can, rather than saying that a certain character has different traits, you can bring that out in how they react to the plot twist.
Well, yeah. And if your mother is going to kill your wife, you better do that on stage. I want to know how she does it. That matters.
I want to know how she does it too.
Just in case.
What? Jonathan's typing a note to his own mother right now. Hey, Mom, Deb was annoying me yesterday. Do you have any bleach?
Please pass that toaster to Deb while she's in the shower.
All right. Well, what I did was I did a little punny exercise analogy to avoid your sagging middle. So one of the things that we talk about in exercise programs is you need to get movement rather than be sedentary. So get your characters moving. Let's say you have bank robbers and they have to plan the bank robbery together. A lot of times when I need to meet with my writers, or anybody I know is a writer, I've met you guys both, we meet at Starbucks. So a lot of times I meet at a diner. So if I were planning to rob a bank, that's probably where I would go. So I'm planning to rob a bank, I'm in a diner, we're writing out the schematics, we're passing the bacons, passing the maple syrup. What's the best thing to have happen? Have 2 cops come in for their lunch break. So now the bank robbers have to gather up their paperwork and their plans and get moving. So they're in San Francisco, let's say, because that's where I'm going to rob my bank because it's nice and warm and I want to go surfing afterwards. So what do
Are you rewriting Pulp Fiction right now? Is that what's happening?
The surf version from a female perspective, yes.
Oh, okay.
So they go outside and what do they see? They see a trolley bus. And their first thought is, let's get on that because it's going to get us away from the cops. Well, what's the number one thing that happens when you're on a trolley bus? You get pickpocketed. So the robbers get pickpocketed. Well, guess what's in one of their wallets? The codes to get into the bank.
Oh.
Or the key that they paid the security guard. So now they don't have the key. So just by moving them, putting them on this trolley bus, they get pickpocketed. It makes you think of something you probably hadn't planned. It makes it more difficult. So a kink has been thrown into the plans only because you got them moving. So what is the best exercise for your midsection?
Sit-ups.
Crunches. So give them a time crunch. If the robbery isn't until next week, so they have to pay the security guard to get another copy of the key. But if the robbery is tonight, that time crunch makes it a lot more interesting. They have to deal with things a lot faster, and it's going to be messier. So, what is another way that we all work out when we're trying?
You have to assume we're working out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm out.
Yeah. So what's another way that people commonly work out? They're on a treadmill, right? And I think that as a writer, a lot of times when you're in the middle, you sort of feel like you're on a treadmill. You started with that exciting beginning, you know your dramatic ending, and you're just on a treadmill thinking, I've got to make this middle happen. I have to do A, B, C before I get to X, Y, Z. So get off the treadmill. The feeling of going through the motions but not enjoying yourself because you're a writer is not going to keep you excited about the middle. So if you're a runner and you're on a treadmill, take them outside, put them on the roads, because now a lot of things are going to come up.
Change the location.
Change the location. You can send them down roads that you know are dead ends, because when they get to the dead end, they don't just have to turn around and run back the same way they came. Maybe they go over the neighbor's fence. And when they go over the neighbor's fence, they find out their neighbor has just bought a new pit bull who is not well trained. Or you have to find a new route, a new way of getting to the end that you hadn't thought of before. There are hills, uphills and downhills. Downhills that are going to make your plot move along quicker in the middle. And then there are also the uphills that are going to make things harder. It could rain. It could thunder and lightning. Your hero could be pulled into a side plot. See how I'm...
That's where you get the whole thing
How do we get the middle of this podcast to stop sagging?
Think of your middle more like a HIIT, a high-intensity interval training, rather than being a hamster on the wheel. And then one other thing, what do all gyms have? Mirrors. Right? Because you want what's going to motivate you really well, rather than saying, "Oh gosh, I don't look so hot in those spandex pants. I better stay I better do my exercise for 10 more minutes." Mirror your character. So let's say your main character is a female. What would happen if you changed her to a male? What if you look in the mirror and you change something really dramatic about your character that you hadn't thought of before? And it might mean in the middle that you have to go back. I mean, obviously, if your character becomes a male, if you change it to a male, you're going to have to go back and have him be a male from the beginning.
Well, maybe not.
Well, this is
exactly,
2019. That can just happen.
Anything's possible.
Right. But if you change something dramatically about your character midpoint, that may thread through back and make things more interesting for you. Or
make you pull your hair out.
Yeah, that might not be a good idea. I wouldn't use all of these things all at once.
But it is about getting creative. It's about challenging yourself as the writer.
Yes.
And if you're not challenged, especially in the midpoint,
right,
then everything just you're just going through the motion and you've lost momentum. You've lost the passion behind what it is that you're doing. So finding new ways to add creativity, I think, will be enough to kind of push you over.
Right. And we all know that feeling of working out. I'm doing bicep curls. I don't think, I'm lifting coffee, I'm lifting donut, I'm lifting coffee, lifting donut. There's a very big difference between doing it with intensity and intent rather than just going through the motions. So I think I think our takeaway here is dead air.
Prevent the sagging middle by keeping things moving along.
Yes.
And I think
avoiding the mistakes that you pointed out to us.
And using all of the pluses that Rick gave to us. But I think also if
dark pluses. Those were
very dark.
Pluses.
I liked them, but they were dark.
And so, Kelly, where can people find you?
I'm on Amazon. Kelly Mcintire, Time Twisted, and Adventures in Fairy Meadow.
And your website?
www.kellymcentireonline.com, and Mcintire is spelled Mcintire.
Perfect. And Rick, where do we find you? I know we find you every other Monday.
Every other Monday at Starbucks. But you can find me at therickpeoples.weebly.com is my webpage, and I'm on Amazon and iTunes and just about everything else underneath the sun.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If you want to hear this episode again or share it with a friend, send them to unitedpodcastnetwork.tv. That's unitedpodcastnetwork.tv. You can find this podcast and the vodcast video on demand in case you want to watch us. Find this episode and all previous episodes on United Podcast Network TV, and please subscribe.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.